been talking a lot in the group in the last few days about swatching and getting gauge. We're about to start a brand new knit along on January 1st. I hope you'll join us, and I'll put a link to that information up here in the corner. And I recently made a video about swatching. Many of you have watched that. So now today's video is going to show you how to measure your gauge and be able to determine whether you're on gauge or whether you're not. And why that's important is gauge just refers to the number of stitches per inch. So you want to know if your chosen yarn and needle combination gets you the number of stitches per inch that your pattern calls for. So that's important for obvious reasons. You want things to fit, right? So people really resist swatching, but it's important if you want things to fit. If you're just making a, like a stole or a wrap or a scarf, then, gauge doesn't matter a whole lot in those specific instances, like a blankie, right? You want it to be big enough, but it doesn't have to fit anybody specifically. So gauge is simply the number of stitches and rows in a certain area. So normally a pattern will tell you how many stitches per inch and rows you want to have within usually it's a 4-inch square. And then you just do the math. So if it tells you, 22 stitches per 4 inches, then do the math. That's 5.5, right? Stitches per inch. And then however many rows that says, in that given area. So what you want to do is knit a swatch, which is normally a 4-inch block. Now, most people don't honestly take the time to knit an entire 4-inch square, particularly at a fingering, but you want to make it big enough that you can adequately measure, right? So you don't want it to be stretched, you don't want it to be pulled, and then there's the argument of, well, do I need to swatch in the round or back and forth? So watch the previous video about swatching. This video, I wanted to show you how to measure and determine your stitches per inch. So I've knitted this piece, and I just did a little garter stitch around the edge just so it would lay flat for the purposes of the video. Like, you don't have to do that. So it's just stockinette stitch, so knitting one way, purling back the other. And I'm going to show you how you measure your gauge. Alright, so I've knitted this nifty swatch, and the idea here is to knit a big enough sample that you can take a measurement in more than one place, and then you can make sure that you're on track. So I've got my handy knit checker gauge thing, and this tells me rows up and down, and this tells me number of stitches per inch across. Okay, so it has directions on here. It says knit a 3-inch square, place this over it, count the number of stitches. Now sometimes that's easier than others. Like if you have funky novelty yarn that's super hairy, you might have some difficulty determining how many stitches you have. So I'm just going to use a different little knitting needle to point with and show you. What you're wanting to do here is count the V. You want to count the V's. So there's 1, see that? 2, 3, and I would say that's probably 3.5, 3.25 stitches per inch. But if I'm going to average that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 within 2 inches, so that would be 13 stitches for 4 inches total. So I'd want to measure that here. I probably would measure it up here somewhere, and then maybe down here. So what did I say? 3.5-ish, 3.25. Yeah, and see that looks the same. There's a V, there's 1, and a little bit. So, and then as far as rows, I'm going to count the V also, making sure I'm at the bottom of a stitch. And I'm going to count, I like to just kind of pick a leg. So what I mean by that is I pick a side right here, like that's 1. That's 1. So I count those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a little bit. So I hope that helps you figure out how to measure your gauge. Okay, so let's say for my particular example, my pattern calls for 15 stitches over a 4-inch swatch. So I only have roughly 13. So what would I need to do is use a smaller diameter needle with the same yarn in order to get more stitches per inch. So I would need to re-swatch with a size smaller needle. So I hope that makes sense. And so if I wanted fewer stitches per inch, you'll want to have a larger diameter needle so that your stitches are bigger, right? So they take up more space. So sometimes people get a little confused about that. You just have to figure the smaller diameter needle produces more stitches per inch. Okay, so it's all about the combination of whatever yarn you're using with the tension that you knit with the size needle. So there's all those variables. So that's why I keep saying every knitter's different. Your mileage may vary. All right, I hope that helps and that makes sense. Please let me know if you have any questions. And as always, I appreciate your support.